In today's episode, we will be looking at one of the lesser-known but very important figures in ancient philosophy. So let's not waste any time and get started. Apollonides was born in Athens around 262 BC. His father was named Athenodorus, and his grandfather was the philosopher Polemon, who was one of the founders of the Stoics. Apollonius's father wanted him to follow his footsteps and become a philosopher. However, Apollonius had other plans and decided to study rhetoric instead, which was quite popular among the upper-class Athenians at that time. He studied under the famous Athenian sophists, Brutus the Bald and Brutus the Little, and became a very accomplished orator. While Apollonius was studying rhetoric, he met his best friend for life, Cato the Younger. They were probably introduced to each other by their fathers, since both Athenodorus and Cato's father, Cato, the Elder, were Roman allies and friends. The two friends were completely different from one another. While Cato was hot-tempered, easily excitable, and impulsive, Apollonius was calm, cool-headed and meditative. But despite their differences, they formed a deep friendship that lasted until Apollonius' death. Cato would later write in one of his letters, "My dear brother, my constant grief is that you are not here. We are like those barbarians who think the life of the one who survives an encounter with wild beasts or robbers is not worth living." After finishing his education in Athens, Apollonius went back to his hometown and began practicing as a lawyer. Cato, on the other hand, went to Rome to continue his political career. The two friends would often write letters to each other while they were apart, and these letters give us a glimpse into the lives and thoughts of these two great Stoics. In one letter, Apollonius wrote to Cato about how he has been neglecting his philosophical studies in favor of pleasure and ease. He tells his friend that he needs to make some changes in his life and that he must not sacrifice virtue for the sake of happiness. Apollonius reminds Cato of what the Stoics had written about living in accordance with nature, and he urges his friend to return to the principles of his philosophy. In another letter, Cato writes to Apollonius about how he has been struggling with a particular philosophical problem, and he asks his friend for help. He tells Apollonius that he has been thinking about the nature of the soul and he wants to know whether it is immortal or not. Cato also asks Apollonius for his opinion on the question of whether or not the gods are just. These are just two examples of the many letters that were exchanged between Cato and Apollonius. Through these letters, we can see the deep friendship that existed between these two men, and we can also gain a better understanding of Stoic philosophy as it was practiced in the ancient world. In one of his letters to Apollonius, Cato discusses the issue of slavery, and he asks his friend for his opinion on the matter. Cato says that he has been thinking about whether or not it is ever permissible to free a slave, and if so, what criteria should be used for making this decision. He tells Apollonius that he believes that slaves are human beings just like anyone else, but he is unsure what he should do about it. This is an interesting example of how Stoic philosophy dealt with real-world issues. The Stoics believed that it was possible to be a philosopher in the ancient world. They didn't live in ivory towers cut off from the rest of humanity. Instead, they tried to apply their philosophy to the problems and challenges of everyday life. Another topic that Cato discussed with Apollonius was the question of suicide. In one letter, Cato mentions that he has recently talked to a young man who is considering ending his own life because he is in a lot of pain. The young man says that he doesn't want to be a burden to his family and friends anymore, and he asks Cato for advice. This is an interesting example of how Stoic philosophy was not just an abstract set of ideas, but was something that people actually put into practice. The Stoics believed that suicide could be a virtue if it was done for the right reasons. For example, if someone was in unbearable physical pain, then it might be better for them to end their own life than to continue suffering. However, suicide was not seen as a solution to every problem, and the Stoics believed that it should only be used as a last resort. Around 214 BC, Apollonius and his family moved to Athens because of the unstable situation in Rome. The younger Cato stayed in Rome with his wife and children while his father was on his last campaign. In 216 BC, Cato the Elder died during the Second Punic War, and a year later, his widow and his sons committed suicide after hearing that their property had been confiscated by the Roman Senate. When Apollonius heard the news about his best friend's family, he was devastated. He wrote to Cato's widow, Marcia, expressing his deepest condolences, and he offered to help her in any way that he could. However, he knew that there was nothing that he could do to bring back her husband or her sons. He felt helpless and hopeless, and he began to lose interest in everything. One day, Apollonius was walking through the marketplace in Athens when he saw a group of people gathered around a philosopher named Pyrrho. Pyrrho was a Stoic philosopher who had recently come to Athens from his home in Elis. Apollonius had heard about Pyrrho before, but he had never seen him in person. As Apollonius approached the crowd, he heard Pyrrho saying that the key to happiness was to live in accordance with nature. Apollonius was immediately drawn to Pyrrho's words, and he began to attend his lectures regularly. Pyrrho was a patient and understanding teacher, and he took Apollonius under his wing. He taught Apollonius how to control his emotions and how to live a life of virtue and wisdom. Under Pyrrho's guidance, Apollonius began to recover from his depression, and he started to find meaning in life once again. Around that same time, Apollonius met another Stoic philosopher named Zeno, who was the founder of Stoicism. Apollonius had read Zeno's works before, but he had never met him in person. Apollonius was impressed by Zeno's wisdom and his ability to teach complex philosophical ideas in a clear and concise way. Apollonius became one of Zeno's most devoted students, and he eventually succeeded him as the head of the Stoic school. When Apollonius returned to Athens, he brought with him the Stoic philosophy that he had learned from Pyrrho and Zeno. He founded his own school of Stoicism in Athens, and he quickly gained a reputation as a wise and respected philosopher. Apollonius taught many famous people, including the Roman Emperor Hadrian. But he was not interested in power or fame. He was content to live a simple life as a teacher and a writer. Apollonius wrote several books on Stoic philosophy, but most of them have been lost to time. However, one of his letters to his student, the future Emperor Hadrian, survived, and it gives us a glimpse into the mind of this great Stoic philosopher. In the letter, Apollonius discusses the nature of virtue and happiness, and he encourages Hadrian to live a life of wisdom and self-control. He also warns Hadrian of the dangers of power and the importance of serving the common good. This letter is an excellent example of how Stoic philosophy was not just a set of abstract ideas, but was something that could be put into practice in the real world. Unfortunately, not much is known about Apollonius' life. Most of what we know comes from the letters that he wrote to his friend Cato the Younger. Apollonius lived during a very turbulent time in Roman history, but he never lost sight of his philosophical ideals. He remained calm and rational in the face of adversity, and he never gave up on his belief in the power of reason and self-control. In conclusion, Apollonius was a great Stoic philosopher who lived during the Hellenistic period. He was a friend and companion of Cato the Younger, and he was one of the teachers of the future Roman Emperor Hadrian. Apollonius believed that the key to happiness was to live in accordance with nature, and he taught this philosophy to his students in Athens. Unfortunately, not much is known about his life, but his letters to Cato give us a glimpse into the mind of this wise philosopher. If you liked this episode, please leave a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.